The flight attendant's saccharine smile never wavered as she blocked the stairs. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this lane is for priority guests only." Ava Sinclair didn't flinch. She had built an empire from the ground up, shattered glass ceilings in an industry dominated by men who underestimated her at every turn. And yet, here she was, being dismissed as if she didn't belong on her own aircraft. She exhaled slowly, her voice like tempered steel. "Fire the entire crew now." The smirk on the co-pilot's face faded as Marcus, her trusted assistant, stepped away, phone already dialing. 10 minutes later, security arrived, escorting the stunned flight staff off the tarmac as Ava ascended the steps of her jet. Challenged, unquestioned, because this wasn't just about a flight, it was about power, and Ava never asked for permission. She took it. But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out. The golden hour sun bathed the sleek private jets in a soft amber glow, casting long shadows across the tarmac of Miami's most exclusive executive airport. The faint hum of luxury engines idling in the distance blended with the occasional murmur of pilots and crew preparing their aircraft. Everything about this place exuded privilege. Silent transactions worth millions happening in glass-walled lounges, champagne flutes clinking in celebration of yet another high-stakes deal. This was a space for the elite, for those who never heard the word no. And Ava Sinclair belonged here whether they liked it or not. She stepped out of the black Rolls-Royce, the sharp click of her Louboutin heels against the pavement punctuating her arrival with quiet authority. Dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit that accentuated her statuesque frame, she moved with the effortless confidence of a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. At 32, she was already a name whispered in billion-dollar boardrooms, a CEO who had shattered expectations and redefined luxury travel. Skylux Ventures wasn't just another aviation brand. It was an empire of bespoke air experiences, an intersection of exclusivity and efficiency. And today, she was en route to London to finalize the most ambitious deal of her career, a merger that would position her company as the leading force in private aviation worldwide. Time was everything. The negotiations had been ruthless, filled with the usual corporate predators circling, waiting for her to falter. But Ava never faltered. She had spent the past week on calls at all hours, anticipating every possible angle, ensuring there was no weak point in her strategy. And now, with the final meeting set in less than 12 hours, she needed to be wheels up immediately. Ava barely acknowledged the valet who opened her car door. She had no time for pleasantries. Instead, she checked her phone one last time. No delays, no last-minute changes. Everything was running on schedule, just the way she demanded. With a silent nod to Marcus Grant, her trusted executive assistant, who had been waiting near the terminal doors, she strode toward her jet. It wasn't just any jet. The Aurora X, a state-of-the-art, fully customized Gulfstream G700, was the crown jewel of her fleet. Sleek, opulent, and equipped with every luxury imaginable, it represented more than just travel. It was a statement. The deep blue exterior gleamed under the Miami sun, the silver Skylux insignia standing bold against the fuselage. This aircraft wasn't just transportation. It was a boardroom in the sky, a fortress of power that carried her from one victory to the next. She adjusted the leather strap of her Hermes bag, her mind already shifting to the upcoming meeting. Every second counted. No room for mistakes, but as she approached the aircraft, a figure stepped into her path, blocking the stairs with an air of quiet condescension. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant said smoothly. Her smile practiced, her tone laced with the kind of subtle dismissal Ava had encountered more times than she could count. "This lane is for priority guests only." Ava didn't move, her expression unreadable as she studied the woman in front of her. Rebecca Lawson, blonde, mid-40s, with the stiff posture of someone who had decided long ago that power only belonged to certain people. The kind of person who delivered insults with a saccharine smile, confident that no one would ever hold her accountable. Ava had met countless Rebeccas in her career, the ones who saw a black woman in luxury and immediately assumed she was lost. "I am a priority guest." Ava said smoothly, her voice like tempered steel. She made no effort to flash credentials, no need to explain herself. The fact that she was standing here, approaching this aircraft, should have been enough. Rebecca's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered with something like amusement, as if this was all a minor inconvenience she would soon correct. "I'm sure there's been some confusion," she said, shifting ever so slightly, just enough to block the stairs. "This aircraft is designated for a very exclusive clientele. If you'd like assistance booking an alternate flight, the main terminal has a concierge service that can—" "Is there a problem here?" A deeper voice cut through the exchange. Ava turned slightly as Derek Foster, the co-pilot, stepped forward. Mid-50s, graying at the temples and already exuding the barely concealed arrogance of a man who believed his title granted him automatic superiority. He gave Ava a once-over, the kind of slow, appraising look that she had seen 1,000 times in boardrooms. The unspoken calculation of whether she belonged in this space or if she was merely an inconvenience to be dealt with. "I was just explaining to this young lady that she may have taken a wrong turn," Rebecca said, still in that infuriatingly sweet tone. Ava's fingers twitched at the phrase. Young lady. Not Miss Sinclair. Not ma'am. Young lady. Deliberately reducing her, chipping away at her authority, making it clear she was seen as lesser, as someone to be corrected. Derek's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Ma'am, this isn't a last-minute upgrade situation," he said, hands on his hips. "This is a private charter for high-level executives and owners." Ava inhaled slowly, measured. Around them, a few passengers in the VIP lounge had turned their heads, watching, some curious, others entertained. No one interjected. No one ever did. She tilted her head, eyes locking onto Derek's. "And you think I don't qualify?" Derek shrugged, clearly enjoying himself now. "I just think mistakes happen. Wouldn't be the first time someone assumed access to something that wasn't meant for them." Rebecca hummed in agreement, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. "You're welcome to wait in the lounge, sweetheart," she said, gesturing toward the glass doors. "We'll call you if there's a mix-up." A flicker of something sharp flashed in Ava's chest. The audacity. The complete and utter certainty in their tones. They believed they could diminish her with a few condescending words and a smile, that she would shrink back, embarrassed, and accept whatever scraps of respect they decided she was worthy of. She felt Marcus's presence before he even spoke. Her executive assistant had stepped forward, his phone already in hand, his sharp gaze assessing the situation. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. Ava exhaled once, slow and deliberate, and reached for her own phone. "Fire the entire crew," she said, her voice calm, almost bored. "Now." Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel, phone already dialing as he walked a few steps away to keep the conversation private. Ava stood perfectly still, her gaze never leaving Rebecca and Derek, who were still basking in their false sense of authority. They didn't know yet. They still thought they had the power in this situation. That was going to change in exactly 10 minutes. "Victor," Marcus said the moment the call connected. His voice was clipped, professional, carrying the urgency of a man who knew how to make things move. "We have an issue. Miss Sinclair has been denied boarding by her own flight crew. I need them removed immediately." Ava could hear the muffled sound of Victor Hayes's voice on the other end. The airline executive, always polished and diplomatic, was undoubtedly trying to smooth things over without making waves. "Marcus, let's handle this professionally," Victor said, his voice measured, like he was dealing with an overreaction. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We don't want to—" Ava extended a hand and Marcus handed her the phone without a word. She lifted it to her ear, gaze still locked onto the crew in front of her. "Victor," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "I am handling it professionally. You have 10 minutes. There was a pause, then the inevitable shift in tone, the realization that this was not a conversation with room for negotiation. "Ava," Victor tried again, his voice losing its smooth confidence. "Let's be reasonable. Replacing an entire flight crew on short notice—" "I don't reward incompetence," Ava interrupted, "and I certainly don't tolerate disrespect. If they aren't off my aircraft in 10 minutes, My legal team will be having a very different conversation with your board of directors." A sharp inhale from the other end. Victor wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what that meant. Ava Sinclair wasn't just a high-profile client. She was one of the airline's largest investors. Losing her business wasn't an option. "I'll handle it," Victor finally said, voice tight. Ava ended the call without another word and handed the phone back to Marcus. 8 minutes, she murmured, loud enough for Rebecca and Derek to hear. She saw it then, the first flicker of doubt in their eyes, a crack in their smug confidence. They weren't in control anymore. She was. Rebecca's smirk faltered the second Victor Hayes stepped onto the tarmac. He moved with forced composure, but the tension in his jaw and the slight sheen of sweat at his temple betrayed him. He already knew this wasn't salvageable. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to clean up a mess before it spiraled any further. Derek Foster, however, didn't seem to get the message. He crossed his arms over his chest, exuding the unshaken confidence of a man who believed his authority was absolute. His eyes darted between Victor and Ava, waiting for someone to declare this whole thing a misunderstanding, waiting for things to return to normal, where people like him made the rules and people like Ava had to prove they belonged. When that didn't happen, he let out a scoff, shaking his head in disbelief. "You think you can throw us out?" His laugh was hollow, forced. "This is ridiculous. We're the crew assigned to this flight. We're not going anywhere." Ava tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to decide whether he was worth another second of her time. Then, in that same calm, deliberate tone, she said, "I don't think. I know." Rebecca's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward Victor, searching for an escape, for someone to step in and tell her this wasn't really happening. Victor, however, had already resigned himself to the inevitable. He turned toward the crew, his voice clipped, professional. "You've been relieved of duty, effective immediately. I suggest you comply." Derek's expression darkened, his posture tensing. "This is a mistake," he snapped. "You can't just replace a flight crew on a whim." Ava finally broke eye contact, reaching for her phone, already scrolling through her contacts as she spoke. "You're right. This isn't a whim. It's a standard consequence for insubordination and unprofessional conduct." She tapped a name on her screen. "By the time I board, there will be a fully capable replacement crew waiting. You, however, will be filing for unemployment." Rebecca's breath hitched, panic setting in now. "Miss Sinclair, I—" "Collect your belongings," Ava interrupted, her voice like ice. "You have 3 minutes." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The moment security stepped onto the tarmac, a ripple of shock spread through the remaining staff. Gasps and hushed whispers filled the air as 2 uniformed officers approached, their presence making it clear that Ava's decision was final. No second chances, no negotiations. The hierarchy of power had been rewritten in an instant. Rebecca took an instinctive step back, her hands shaking slightly as she fumbled with the clasp of her flight attendant badge. "This is insane," she whispered, eyes darting between Victor and the security officers, as if one of them might offer her salvation. But Victor was already looking away, pretending to check his phone, distancing himself from the fallout. Derek, on the other hand, wasn't backing down. He squared his shoulders, his face flushed with anger as he glared at Ava. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, venomous. "You think you can humiliate us like this and just walk away?" Avo barely blinked. "I don't think. I know." His jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." Ava met his stare without a flicker of fear, then gestured toward security. "Get them off my runway." The officers stepped forward. Rebecca let out a shaky breath, nodding quickly as she grabbed her bag and hurried toward the terminal, her heels clicking unevenly against the pavement. Derek, however, stood his ground, until one of the guards placed a firm hand on his arm. His nostrils flared, his body taut with barely restrained fury, but he knew better than to resist. As he was led away, he threw one last glare over his shoulder, but Ava had already turned, dismissing him like an afterthought. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer and climbed the steps to her jet, not bothering to watch as security escorted the former crew out of sight. A new crew would be in place within minutes. The flight would take off on schedule. Everything had been handled with precision. She had made an example of them, and the entire airport had witnessed it. As Ava settled into her seat, the soft hum of the jet's engines vibrating beneath her, she closed her eyes for a moment. The past had a way of creeping in at the strangest times, unbidden but never forgotten. And just like that, she was 12 years old again, sitting at a fine dining restaurant with her mother, the memory so sharp it felt like she was still there. The restaurant had been one of the most elegant places in downtown Chicago, the kind of establishment where chandeliers cast golden light over white linen tablecloths, where waiters in crisp black vests glided between tables carrying silver trays, where the sound of quiet jazz mixed with the clinking of crystal glasses. It was meant to be a special night. Her mother had saved for weeks to take her here, a celebration of Ava's acceptance into an elite academic program. She had been excited, dressed in a soft lavender dress her mother had picked out, her hair in neatly pressed curls. They had arrived early, the maitre d' offering a tight-lipped smile before leading them to a table near the back of the restaurant, away from the grand windows where the wealthiest patrons dined. It hadn't mattered at first. Her mother had sat tall, exuding the same quiet confidence she always carried, even in places designed to make them feel small. But 20 minutes passed, then 30. Ava's excitement slowly faded into discomfort as waiters floated past their table, refilling glasses and taking orders at the surrounding tables while theirs remained untouched. She had tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe they were busy, maybe it was just an oversight. But then she saw the way one waiter, a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair, deliberately avoided their table, his gaze skimming over them like they didn't exist. Her mother finally raised a hand, her voice poised but firm. "Excuse me, we haven't been attended to yet." The waiter stopped, sighing as if she had asked him for something unreasonable. He approached slowly, leaning in just enough that only they could hear. "You don't belong here," he murmured, his smile tight, his tone smooth and practiced, like he had said these words before. Ava felt her stomach twist, a heat rising in her chest that she didn't yet have the words to describe. She looked at her mother, expecting anger, expecting her to lash out, to demand to see a manager, to cause a scene, the way other people did when they weren't treated how they expected. But her mother didn't do any of those things. Instead, she reached across the table, gently taking Ava's small hand in hers. "Calm day," she said softly, her voice steady, unshaken. "We'll own places like this." She had left a generous tip on the table despite receiving no service. Then she had taken Ava's hand and walked out of that restaurant with her head held high, never once looking back. Ava had never forgotten. Ava inhaled deeply, the cool air of the jet's cabin filling her lungs as she stepped inside. The scent of polished leather and faint traces of citrus lingered in the air, the space meticulously arranged exactly to her specifications. Everything about this jet was designed for efficiency and comfort. Sleek, cream-colored seats, subtle gold accents, a custom-built workspace that functioned as her mobile boardroom. It was more than luxury, it was control. It was a world where she dictated the rules. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer as she moved toward her seat, her heels silent against the plush carpeting. The flight attendant, her new flight attendant, offered a polite nod, her demeanor professional, measured. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Sinclair. Your cabin is fully prepared, and we're ready for takeoff as soon as you give the word." Ava returned the nod but said nothing, settling into the high-backed seat by the window. The large pane of glass reflected the fading Miami skyline, the horizon painted in streaks of burnt orange and deep violet. The memory of that restaurant still lingered in her mind, a ghost from the past brushing against the edges of her consciousness. She thought of her mother's words, the quiet promise she had made all those years ago. "One day, we'll own places like this." That night, they had walked out of that restaurant with nothing but their dignity intact. But now, she was the one who decided who stayed and who was asked to leave. This wasn't just about a jet. It was about rewriting that past. It was about every boardroom she had walked into where men had underestimated her, Every deal she had negotiated where executives had assumed she was there as someone's assistant. Every moment in her career when someone had questioned her presence in spaces she had built her way into. She had just done what her mother had done that night all those years ago. Only this time, she wasn't the one walking away. The ones who thought she didn't belong were the ones being escorted out. Marcus approached quietly, his phone in hand, though he hesitated before speaking. He knew better than to break her silence when she was in this state of mind, but eventually he cleared his throat. "The replacement crew is on their way. We'll be wheels up in 20 minutes. Ava didn't look away from the window. And the others? Security walked them off the premises. Derek was still mouthing off on the way out. Something about making you regret this. She smirked just slightly. Let him try. Marcus exhaled, his expression shifting to something amused. Victor was a mess on the phone. You put the fear of God in him. You should be afraid, she murmured. I don't tolerate incompetence. A pause, then softer, or disrespect. Marcus studied her for a moment, the weight of those last words hanging between them. He had been working for her long enough to understand what this moment meant. This wasn't just about firing a flight crew. It was about something much bigger. He gave a small nod, then glanced at his watch. Your pilot's waiting on your final confirmation to depart. Ava took one last look out the window, at the airport where this battle had played out. Then, finally, she exhaled and turned away. Let's fly. The jet had been airborne for just under an hour when Ava's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a name she never ignored. Naomi Ellis, best friend, business partner, the only person Ava trusted implicitly in both war and peace. If Naomi was calling mid-light, it wasn't for small talk. Ava swiped to answer, her voice calm but alert. Tell me. Naomi didn't waste time. It's Elliot Grayson. He's making a move on Titan Aerotech. Ava's grip on her phone tightened, her other hand curling into a fist on the armrest. Elliot Grayson. The same smug billionaire who had spent the past 5 years circling her industry like a vulture, picking off competitors, leveraging backdoor deals, always staying just inside the lines of legality. He was ruthless, unethical, and worst of all, powerful. If he was targeting Titan Aerotech, it wasn't random, it was strategic. She exhaled slowly, keeping her voice level. What's his angle? Naomi's voice was tense, clipped. He's promising an immediate cash injection in exchange for controlling shares. He's positioning himself as the safer bet, saying Titan needs stability, not controversy. Vaz's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what that meant. He's using the flight crew incident against me, leaking it to the media, spinning it as an example of reckless leadership, implying you're impulsive, unpredictable. Ava's jaw clenched. She could already see the headlines. CEO fires entire crew in fit of rage. Diva executive's power trip costs airline millions. The world never hesitated to turn a powerful black woman's decisions into a spectacle, never stopped questioning whether she deserved to be where she was. Meanwhile, men like Elliot made cutthroat moves every day and were celebrated for it. She forced herself to breathe, to push past the heat of frustration and into the cold, calculating space where she thrived. How close is he to closing the deal? Naomi hesitated. Too close. Board members are divided. Some still back you, but a few are starting to waver. Grayson's banking on that hesitation. Ava's grip on the armrest tightened. Titan Aerotech was one of the most critical suppliers in private aviation. If Elliot got his hands on it, he wouldn't just control a major piece of the industry, he'd control a piece of her future. He'd be able to manipulate aircraft production, hike prices, delay shipments. He could sabotage her entire expansion plan. She wasn't just fighting for Titan, she was fighting for her empire. She straightened, her mind already working through possible countermoves. I need a meeting with Titan's CEO. Immediately. I already anticipated that. Hawthorne's in New York. He's got a tight schedule, but I pulled some strings. You can get in front of him tomorrow morning. Ava smirked despite the tension. Naomi always stayed 3 steps ahead. Marcus, who had been quietly listening across from her, finally spoke. I'll rearrange your London meetings. Your priority is Titan. Ava nodded, already making a mental list of the leverage she could use. Then she leaned back in her seat, eyes narrowing. If Elliot wants a fight, I'll give him one. By the time Ava's jet touched down in New York, the headlines were already spreading like wildfire. Naomi had warned her, but seeing it plastered across major financial and business news sites still sent a slow, simmering heat through her veins. Ava Sinclair, the diva CEO, too emotional for business? Power trip or poor leadership? Billionaire fires entire crew in sudden outburst? Unstable leadership, what Ava Sinclair's recent incident says about her business ethics. It was predictable, infuriatingly so. The world never hesitated to paint powerful black women as aggressive, unstable, difficult. If a male CEO had done exactly what she did, they'd call it decisive leadership or a strategic move to ensure quality control. But because it was her, it was a scandal. She scrolled through the articles, taking in the carefully chosen language. Words like erratic, demanding, high-strung, thinly veiled attacks disguised as business critiques, quotes from anonymous industry insiders whispering that she had overreacted and alienated key aviation figures. And then there was Elliot. Of course, he had inserted himself into the narrative. A senior executive at a competing aviation firm who asked to remain unnamed expressed concern over the incident, stating, "Leadership requires patience and stability. We need to ask if Sinclair's impulsive actions indicate a deeper issue with how she runs her business." Ava nearly laughed. The coward didn't even have the spine to put his name on it, but she recognized his fingerprints all over this. Marcus, seated across from her in the SUV that was taking them into the city, was already flipping through his tablet, scanning updates. "Grayson's running the same playbook he always does," he muttered. "Create chaos, exploit hesitation, swoop in as the safe option." Naomi's voice came through on speakerphone. "The Titan board is watching all of this unfold. Hawthorne isn't an idiot, but if too much pressure builds, he could be forced into choosing the path of least resistance. And right now, Elliot's working overtime to make sure that isn't you." Ava tapped her manicured nails against the leather seat, her mind sharpening into focus. If Elliot thought he could use this against her, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Ava's jaw tightened as she scrolled past yet another headline questioning her leadership. The media was eating it up, feeding off the controversy, turning her decision into entertainment for those who had never had their authority questioned. She had expected this. She had lived this pattern too many times to be surprised. She lifted her phone, dialing Marcus without hesitation. "Prepare the legal team. I want every dirty deal Elliot has ever done in front of me within the hour." There was no need to explain. Marcus had already anticipated this move. "We've been compiling a file for months," he said, voice steady. "I'll have a full report on your desk by the time you get to the hotel." Ava exhaled through her nose, her mind sharpening. "Good. Have Patricia draft a preliminary statement countering the media narrative. We're not playing defense. We're taking control of this." "Understood." A brief pause. "And what about Titan's board?" Ava's lips curled slightly. "They want a leader who can handle pressure. I'm about to show them exactly why Elliot Grayson isn't one." As soon as she ended the call, she opened her emails, scanning through the brief Marcus had already forwarded. Elliot had built his empire on deception and opportunism. She didn't need to fabricate anything. His history spoke for itself. Several acquisitions, where he had promised long-term investment only to gut the companies and sell off the remains for quick profit. A lawsuit settled quietly after former employees accused him of unethical labor practices. Stock manipulations, backdoor negotiations, a pattern of making moves that benefited him in the short term but left destruction in his wake. And now he was positioning himself as the responsible choice? Ava set down her phone, staring out the tinted window as the SUV wove through the city streets. The skyline loomed ahead, gleaming and ruthless, much like the world she operated in. She had spent years proving she belonged here, that she wasn't just another temporary success story waiting to be taken down. She would not let Elliot Grayson turn her into a cautionary tale. Naomi's voice crackled through the car's speaker system, her tone brisk. I managed to get a read on the Titan board's internal conversations. There are a few swing votes, people who want to back you but are afraid of the optics. You need to show them why you're the only viable choice. Ava nodded, already calculating. I will. You'll need to be strategic. Hawthorne respects boldness, but he won't entertain theatrics. Keep it sharp, keep it focused. Ava's gaze flicked to the stack of documents Marcus had left for her. Trust me, by the time I walk out of that boardroom, there won't be a single doubt left in their minds. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime, revealing the sleek glass-paneled boardroom of Titan Aerotech's New York headquarters. Ava stepped out first, her movements fluid, controlled. Marcus followed just behind, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, his face unreadable. The room was already full, board members seated in high-backed chairs around the long conference table, the city skyline stretching behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was thick with anticipation, and at the head of the table, leaning back with the practiced ease of a man who had never known what it meant to fight for his place, sat Elliot Grayson. He was exactly as Ava had expected, smug, polished, utterly convinced that he had already won. His suit was tailored to perfection, his blonde hair swept back in a way that made him look like every other privileged billionaire who had been handed power and mistook it for talent. He didn't rise when she entered, he simply offered a slow, amused smile like he was indulging her presence. Ava, he drawled, tilting his head, so glad you could join us. I wasn't sure you'd make it, considering all the press you've been getting lately. A few of the board members exchanged glances, waiting for her reaction. Ava didn't blink. I don't let distractions keep me from business. Elliot's smile widened, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of the table. Hard to do business when the press calls you unstable. Silence fell over the room, a calculated move. He wanted her to react, to play into the very narrative he was spinning. But Ava didn't rise to the bait. She had spent her entire career navigating rooms full of men just like him, men who mistook arrogance for intelligence, who expected her to falter the moment things got difficult. She moved to the empty seat across from him, but didn't sit. Instead, she placed a thick folder onto the table and slid it forward with deliberate precision. The weight of it landed with a quiet thud. Before we discuss my leadership, she said, her voice even, let's discuss yours. Elliot's smirk twitched, just barely. Ava gestured to the file. Inside, you'll find a detailed record of your acquisitions over the past 10 years. The companies you promised to grow, only to strip for parts and sell off for profit. The investors you misled, the lawsuits you settled quietly to avoid exposure. The employees you underpaid while inflating executive salaries. One of the board members, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, flipped open the folder. Her gaze darkened as she scanned the first few pages. Elliot chuckled, shaking his head. Come on, Ava, you're reaching. Every business leader makes tough calls. Ava met his gaze without hesitation. Tough calls or calculated destruction? She let the words hang in the air before continuing. See, unlike you, I build. I expand. I invest in the long term. I don't take shortcuts, and I don't make promises I can't keep. She turned toward the board. That's the difference between us. He'll give you short-term gains at the cost of long-term stability. I'll give you both. The tension in the room shifted. Board members were no longer just observing, they were considering. Elliot leaned back, but his smile had lost its confidence. You can talk about the past all you want, but right now, you're the one in the middle of a media firestorm. This board has to ask themselves, do they really want to tie their reputation to someone who just made headlines for firing an entire flight crew in what the press is calling a fit of rage? Ava let the silence stretch just long enough. Then she reached into her own portfolio and pulled out a printed statement. This is the official security report from that incident, she said, passing copies down the table. It includes statements from witnesses and surveillance footage confirming that my name was on the flight manifest, that my presence was questioned despite my status as an owner, and that I acted within my rights to replace employees who failed to meet the professional standards expected at my company. She clasped her hands together. The only story here is that I refused to be disrespected, and I refuse to let any of my business partners be misled into thinking Elliot Grayson is a safer bet than me." A murmur spread through the boardroom. Elliot's jaw tightened ever so slightly. For the first time since she walked in, he wasn't in control of the narrative. Ava leaned forward just enough to meet his gaze head-on. "The question you should be asking isn't whether I'm too much of a risk." She let the corner of her mouth lift in something resembling a smirk. "It's whether you can afford to risk not working with me." The silence that followed Ava's words was thick, stretching across the room like an invisible weight pressing down on every person seated at the table. The only sounds were the faint rustling of papers as board members flipped through the file she had provided, scanning the documented proof of Elliot's business history. Every fraudulent deal, every unethical acquisition, every quiet settlement meant to cover his tracks. Elliot's smug expression had slipped, just barely, but it was enough. His jaw was set, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair, his confidence no longer effortless, but forced. Ava had seen this reaction before. The moment a man realized he had underestimated her, the slow unraveling of his composure when he understood he wasn't as untouchable as he believed. Daniel Hawthorne, the CEO of Titan Aerotech, was the first to break the silence. He cleared his throat, adjusting the reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he set down the document in front of him. His sharp gaze lifted to Ava, assessing. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his tone careful but intrigued, "we'd like to hear more about your proposal." Ava didn't hesitate. She knew this was her moment, and she wouldn't waste it. She stood, exuding confidence, as she reached for the presentation Marcus had prepared, sliding a separate folder across the table. "Titan Aerotech is at a crossroads," she began, her voice even and commanding. "You're looking for long-term stability, for expansion into emerging markets, for innovation that will position you ahead of the competition. I can offer that." She gestured toward the proposal. Skylux Ventures has spent the last 5 years transforming private aviation, not just in luxury experiences, but in efficiency, sustainability, and global reach. I don't make reckless investments. I build infrastructure that lasts. If you partner with me, you get a company that understands both the technological and market demands of the future, not just someone looking for their next payout. Her gaze flicked briefly to Elliot before she continued. "I'm not here to strip Titan for parts. I'm here to expand it, to ensure that 10 years from now, this company is stronger than it has ever been. And I intend to do that with integrity and strategy, not with short-sighted profit grabs disguised as leadership." A murmur spread through the boardroom. A few members exchanged glances, some nodding slightly as they continued to scan the proposal. Elliot, however, wasn't done. He leaned forward, forcing a smile, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "That's all very inspiring, Ava," he said, his tone dipped in condescension. "But let's not pretend this isn't also about reputation. A partnership with you right now comes with baggage, media controversy, questions about stability. The board needs to consider whether they want to tie themselves to someone who's made headlines for all the wrong reasons." Ava tilted her head slightly, studying him. She could feel the board watching, waiting to see how she would respond. So she smiled. "Elliot," she said, her voice smooth, "you of all people should know that media narratives can be controlled. What matters isn't the noise, it's the results. And if this board is truly concerned about reputation, then they should ask themselves which story they want attached to Titan Aerotech. A CEO who takes decisive action to ensure excellence, or a businessman with a track record of cutting and running the moment things stop serving his interests." She let the words settle, let the weight of them sink in. She wasn't on the defensive. She wasn't here to justify herself. She was making it clear, choosing her wasn't a risk. Choosing him was. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We'll take both proposals into final consideration," he said, his tone measured but firm. "We appreciate your time." Ava smiled politely, but she already knew. She had shifted the room. Ava remained perfectly composed as the board members stood, murmuring amongst themselves, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Elliot, on the other hand, was unraveling. His fingers tapped an impatient rhythm against the table, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. He knew. Even before Hawthorne spoke, even before the final vote was called, he knew he had lost. Hawthorne glanced around the room, giving each board member a final look before straightening his posture. His expression was unreadable as he placed both hands on the table and spoke with quiet authority. Titan Aerotech has carefully considered both proposals, and after thorough discussion, we've decided to move forward with Miss Sinclair's offer. Elliot's chair scraped against the floor as he shot to his feet. You can't be serious. Hawthorne barely spared him a glance. We are. Elliot let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head like he was witnessing something absurd. This is a mistake, a massive mistake. Ava's leadership is a liability, and when this deal blows up in your faces, don't come looking for me to clean up the mess. Ava finally turned to him, her expression cool, detached, a sharp contrast to his barely restrained frustration. You should get used to this feeling, Elliot, she said smoothly. It's what happens when the smarter option wins. His nostrils flared, his hands balling into fists before he forced himself to relax. He adjusted his suit jacket, straightening his tie as if regaining some of his lost composure, but his eyes burned with fury. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the boardroom, his footsteps heavy with defeat. The silence he left behind was thick, but Ava didn't let it linger. She turned back to Hawthorne, extending a hand. I look forward to building something great together. Hawthorne took her hand in a firm shake, nodding. Welcome to Titan Aerotech, Miss Sinclair. It was hers now. The news came the next morning, delivered with a dry chuckle from Marcus, as he placed his phone down on the sleek marble counter of Ava's penthouse suite. Rebecca and Derek are suing, he said, amusement laced in his tone. Wrongful termination, claiming you fired them without cause and damaged their reputations. Ava barely looked up from her laptop, where she was reviewing the final Titan Aerotech acquisition paperwork. Of course they are, she said, unimpressed. People like them always play the victim when consequences catch up to them. Marcus leaned against the counter, scrolling through the complaint. They're alleging discrimination, claiming they were let go without due process. Derek's even trying to spin it like you were the one acting unprofessionally. He let out a low laugh. Apparently he thinks he can paint himself as the reasonable one in this situation. Ava finally glanced up, tilting her head slightly. And what's the media doing with it? Picking it up, but not with the angle they wanted. He smirked. Turns out the public doesn't have a lot of sympathy for a crew that refused service to the owner of the plane. He tapped the screen. Still, some outlets are framing it as another example of you being too cutthroat. Ava sighed, closing her laptop. Then let's end this quickly. She picked up her phone and dialed Patricia Lewis, her lead attorney. Tell opposing counsel that if they'd like to continue with this ridiculous lawsuit, I'd be happy to release the full security footage from that day, unedited with audio. The footage that shows Rebecca refusing to check my name on the manifest, Derek dismissing me like I was trespassing, their entire pattern of unprofessionalism on display. She let a pause stretch, then added, and let them know that if they pursue this further, I'll countersue for defamation. Patricia chuckled on the other end. Understood. I'll have this dismissed by the end of the week. Ava hung up, turning back to Marcus. That should take care of it. And it did. By the time the footage was made available to both legal teams, Rebecca and Derek's case fell apart. Their attorneys withdrew within days, realizing there was no ground to stand on. The story faded from the news cycle just as quickly as it had appeared, and Ava moved forward without a second thought. She had won. Again. Ava stepped onto the jet, the familiar scent of leather and citrus welcoming her as she moved through the cabin. The new crew stood in perfect formation, poised, professional, and most importantly, respectful. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Adrienne Lewis, greeted her with a warm but polished smile. Welcome aboard, Miss Sinclair. We're honored to have you. Ava gave a small nod, taking in the subtle differences. No hesitation. No questioning glances, no underlying tension, just seamless efficiency. "Thank you," she said simply before moving toward her seat. She settled by the window, exhaling as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep gold and violet. The engines hummed beneath her, steady and powerful, carrying her higher and farther than ever before. She wasn't just flying. She was soaring. Her phone buzzed just as the seatbelt sign dimmed. She reached for it, glancing at the screen. Naomi. "Elliot won't back down. Stay ready." Ava's lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. She tapped out a response, her fingers moving with practiced ease.
"I always am."
Power isn't just about money or status. It's about control. Over your own narrative, over the spaces you enter, over the respect you demand. Ava Sinclair knew that better than anyone. She had spent her entire life proving that she belonged in rooms where people like her were often overlooked, dismissed, or outright challenged. And when she was told, once again, that she wasn't supposed to be there, she didn't ask for permission. She took action. But now, the question is yours.
Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to tell you that you didn't belong? Maybe it was subtle. A glance, a hesitation, an assumption that you weren't important enough to be where you were. Maybe it was direct, words meant to undermine you, rules that only seemed to apply when you walked through the door. When that moment came, how did you respond? Did you fight back? Did you let it slide? And if you could go back, would you do anything differently?
You think Ava was justified in firing the entire crew, or was there another way to handle it? She didn't negotiate. She didn't try to change their minds. She removed the problem immediately, making an example of those who thought they could decide who was worthy of respect. Was that the right call? Or should she have taken a different approach? Would you have done the same in her position? Or do you believe in handling things more diplomatically?
The conversation doesn't end here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Ava's response a power move or an overreaction? Would you have stood your ground the same way? Let's talk.
Ava Sinclair didn't ask for respect. She took it. Because in a world that constantly tries to push you aside, waiting for permission is the quickest way to be forgotten. She had spent years proving she was more than capable, more than worthy, more than enough. And still, there were those who looked at her and saw only what they wanted to see. Someone who didn't belong. Someone they thought they could ignore, dismiss, or control.
But Ava had learned a long time ago that the only way to change the rules was to refuse to play by them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg for fairness. She acted. She removed the obstacles in her way without hesitation. And in doing so, she sent a message that no one in that airport, no one in that boardroom, and certainly no one like Elliot Grayson would ever forget.
Respect isn't given, it's taken. And when the world tries to tell you that you don't belong, that you're too much, too ambitious, too bold, show them that you do. Show them that you earned your place, that you built your seat at the table, that you are not waiting for approval from those who were never meant to define your worth in the first place. Ava Sinclair didn't just fire a flight crew that day, she fired a warning shot to every person who had ever doubted her. She didn't just secure a business deal, she secured her legacy. And now the question is, when the moment comes for you to decide whether you'll shrink back or stand firm, what will you do? Will you let them tell you who you are, or will you show them exactly who you were meant to be? What's your story of standing up against discrimination? Share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and change. Together, we can create a world where everyone's dignity is recognized and respected. Every act of defiance against injustice, no matter how small, sends a powerful message. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to challenge bias, whether in the workplace, at school, or in everyday life? How did you handle it? Did you confront the person, seek legal action, or find another way to reclaim your power? Your experience might inspire someone who's struggling to find their voice right now. If Ava Sinclair's story teaches us anything, it's that power is not given, it's taken. Respect is not something you wait for, it's something you demand. Whether it's in a boardroom, a courtroom, or even an airport terminal, we all have moments where we must decide, will we let others dictate our worth, or will we stand firm and show them exactly who we are? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's start a conversation about real change. If you believe in standing up, in rewriting the rules, in making sure no one else has to fight the same battles alone, then join us, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that prove one undeniable truth. When you know your worth, no one can take it from you.